We will discuss inputs that we've received and how we move forward with the second draft. So with that, let's move to the next slide. I'll do a quick introduction, tell you where we are at right now, and our next steps. Kat, are we able to move to the next slide? Okay, perfect. So a few quick things on accessibility. If you'd like to enable closed captions, you can do that, and you can also enable translated captions if English is not the language you're most comfortable in. This webinar will be conducted in the English language. A few quick community guidelines. So on equity and inclusion, it's important that we prioritize global majority. Note that this is a policy text, so we encourage using UNFCCC style language that's aligned with the first global stocktake. We want to be solutions oriented. We want to be focused on culture and preserve local culture, storytelling, and traditional knowledge. Importantly, we acknowledge that a lot of the topics discussed can result in um, people feeling, particularly people being reminded of certain trauma. So we encourage a respectful and trauma-aware and accessible environment. And finally, transparency and respect. We want this to be a safe space for all participants and be clear about our desired outcomes. If you have disagreements with the inputs we share today, we also welcome you sharing that with us in the chat. All right. So on the next slide, I think we're having some trouble with slide sharing, but if you'll allow me to keep soldiering on, we will figure it out in due time. So I'll just take you through the agenda for today. We'll do a quick introduction and overview of the Cultural Global Stocktake Dex process. I'll call it CGST for short, so we don't have to go through that every time. And then we'll have sections for plenary discussion. So I'll talk about outcomes of the CGST, which is the initial part of the text. Now, note that the text it's fairly long, so we have two sessions. Today's session is focused on the first five sections of the CGST. But then we have a few other sections that our team will cover today. We'll talk about context and cross-cutting considerations. Thirdly, we'll talk about mitigation. The fourth section is adaptation. The fifth section is finance. And then we'll move forward with conclusions and next steps. All right, a few other things I'll say to level set. I'm seeing the names we have in the call, and I think most of you are pretty familiar with the CGST process. If you are, however, new and if you're not aware, we recommend if you'd like a one-on-one on what the CGST is, we've had a webinar before where we've introduced that. I've dropped the link to that in the chat. But let's move on to the next slide and we'll tell you what has happened so far. So this is a picture from our Marrakesh Partnership Accelerator. It's one of the seed giftings that our partners at the Walking Forest brought. And it's a good picture to indicate where we are at this stage of the process. It's the very beginning of planting and growing something together that still has more work to do. So we began the process this year in February with a very well attended webinar orientation. I've dropped the link to that in chat. This is on our YouTube channel, and it's an introduction to the CGST. Then we did a series of preliminary consultations, spiritual discussions, both in person as well as online, to deliver what we're calling the zero draft. So the zero draft was then brought to our Marrakesh Partnership Accelerator in March. So some of you today, especially those who are helping us with facilitation, were in Marrakesh with us. And we collaborated with local partners. We had delegates from all over the world join. We had about 50 delegates, and we did 4 days of plenaries to deliver the first draft of the CGST. And I want to start today's plenary by thanking you on behalf of the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion team, the incredible work everyone did, and the generosity with which you showed up. Thank you for your support. We also had participation from the UNFCCC Secretariat and from the COP30 presidency and other stakeholders. For those who don't have quick access to this already, I'm dropping a link in chat to the first draft of the CGST, which is what we will be workshopping today. So the beautiful thing about this process is that it has been decentralized and ongoing. So in the last few weeks, we've already had many different consultations to provide more inputs for the CGST. You'll find on the next slide that some of these include a cross-working group consultation with Youngo. This is a picture from the Marrakesh Accelerator, but these are some of the recent consultations we had. So we've had a cross-working group consultation with Youngo where more than 270 people participated. There are many events where people self-organize. And of course, as we go through draft one today, this is also an invitation for you to do the same in your communities. And the goal of the consultations is to continue iterating and providing inputs and suggestions on the CGST. You'll see that we've had consultations in Brazil, Los Angeles Climate Week, a couple weeks ago in Istanbul, Turkey, and also the first consultation that took place in Burkina Faso. So this is incredible to see. Today we'll move forward with some of the inputs we've received on the CGST since the first draft. Our goal is to move towards draft two. And draft two is what we will take to SB64, to London Climate Action Week, and it will be the first draft that we will use in bilaterals with parties. It will also be a proof of concept before the third and final version. So thank you so much for the extraordinary level of detail in all of the inputs which you have shared with us. I'm dropping a link to this in chat. These are all the inputs we've received so far. Note that we won't be able to read them all because some are incredibly elaborate, but what we've done today is consolidated the key insights from the inputs we've received, and we will discuss those today. But if you see throughout the presentation that there is something that you submitted that is not being covered in the points here, please feel free to mention this in the chat to see if you have any further input. Now, some quick facts on what we have so far. We have received 62 inputs from 27 countries. We've got 2,700 clicks on draft one. And so we expect, while 62 might seem like a small number, we've received very elaborate submissions. And then we also expect to receive more input since this is a continuous iterative process. And we're also very excited that more than 73 organizations have already filled out the partnership form to be knowledge partners of the CGST, and we will share more details about this at the end. A few other facts. So 56.5% of the contributions we've received are from people who are already actively engaging in the UNFCCC processes, which means that they might have attended a COP or an SB or they're a registered organization and so forth. But 34% have not. And that's great because that's also part of the work that we're trying to do here, which is to get more cultural practitioners involved in climate policy. So on the next slide, you'll also see a breakdown of the verbs that we have been using in the first draft. And we found this really interesting to find out that the verb that we've used the most in the CGST so far is recognizes. And that makes sense because culture has still not been recognized in major policy frameworks. So of course, we're striving for recognition first and foremost. But you'll also see that we have more verbs like encourages, notes, recalls. At the same time, we have potential to more radically push for action with verbs such as notes concerns or orders or requests or strongly reaffirms. So in today's plenary, we might also think about how in some of the paragraphs that we will be workshopping, we can change some of the verb allocation choices and move perhaps away from recognition in some places to more action-oriented verbs or verbs that more radically push for action. So we'll get started. First, let's identify the methodology that we'll go through. So each of our speakers will first highlight the basic facts of the section that they're covering. Second, we'll look at some inputs that we have received from consultations which show alignment, meaning that what has been discussed in the consultations reflects what is already in the draft, showing that those paragraphs and that language is already in a good shape. And then third, we'll spend the most time doing this. We'll address specific gaps or suggestions around how we can improve the text of draft one as we move towards draft two. What I will flag is that we want to spend an average of 25 minutes maximum per section. What that means is we will not have a lot of time for discussion. So to move things along quickly, some ground rules will be if don't hear any disagreement through the chat, we'll assume that there is general approval and consensus for the suggestions mentioned. If there is disagreement, feel free to drop it in the chat. We will discuss whatever time allows us to. The rest of it will be noted down, and we'll ensure that it is addressed in future conversations as well. Now, the main goal of today's conversation is to give you updates of the current drafts to make sure you're familiarized with it, understand where key changes are needed for draft two, and also celebrate the contributions we've received so far. All right. So with that, just a reminder on participation guidelines. Another thing, if you strongly agree with something and want to move beyond just silence as consensus, we recommend you add plus signs in the chat. If there is something really important that you don't think can be captured accurately in chat, you can raise your hand to speak. We would request that you keep any speaking interventions under a minute. And that's all. With that, I think we can get started by talking about the outcome of the CGST. If there are any technical questions that come up, feel free to drop them and we'll address them. All right. So on the next slide, we'll show you a lovely graphic that Jen Ray has kindly co-created. So this graphic, this is an ecosystem visualization. It shows the foundational framework that the CGST is built upon, which is the cultural ecosystem. It recognizes three very important dimensions of this ecosystem. So on the next slide, you'll see a breakdown of these. It does not reduce culture to just the creative industries or an economic sector, but also recognizes the foundational human rights that culture rests upon. It recognizes the values, knowledge, practices, and of course, the infrastructure that comes with culture. So we wanted to highlight that and also note that Jen has very kindly said that Jen is very open to input on the graphics as well. So with that, let's talk about the first section of the stock take, which is a preamble or introductory statement. So as we just discussed, the first section establishes this cultural ecosystem framework. It defines the purpose, scope, and political framing of the CGST. It establishes culture as a human right, a global public good, a driver and enabler of climate action, and a missing dimension in current climate governance. It also connects the CGST to the Paris Agreement, Article 14, Montreal 2025, the Global Goal on Adaptation, concepts of climate justice, data on the creative economy, and the need to inform the GST2 and future climate decision making. So, what are some of the inputs that we have received so far that reaffirm the text that is already in the draft? So let's start with the first example. I'll go a little slow on the first one so we sort of understand how the plenary will proceed, and then we'll start to speed through many of them. So this is the second point of the first section of the CGST. It reads, further recognizing culture as diverse systems of meaning, values, artistic expression, knowledges and practices through which societies interpret, inhabit, and respond to the world, expressed and sustained through cultural ecosystems and transmitted through generations, as well as enabling infrastructures, constituting economic activities, producing and distributing cultural goods and services without encompassing the totality of culture itself. So this is where we define culture essentially. And then on the next slide, you'll see that this paragraph has been reaffirmed through inputs from other consultations. So Muskan from India, for example, says that culture should be understood not only as heritage or artistic production, but more broadly as emotional, relational, and it is what people use to make meaning of climate change. Salomão from Brazil also mentions the same thing about culture being a foundational dimension and a critical driver that shapes human values. So we feel that this paragraph is one that being reaffirmed, not just through these two inputs, but other inputs that we've also consolidated that we've received through the consultation. So we think this will remain quite similar. So on the next slide, let's move to the third point. So in this third point of the preamble, we recall Articles 7.5 and 12 of the Paris Agreement, which emphasize that effective climate action requires inclusive, participatory, and cooperative approaches across all levels of society. This has again been reaffirmed through the inputs we've received on the next slide. So again, some of this language is very similar to what you saw on the slide prior, where Mustafa from Jordan talks about how culture is an essential part of climate action. Ustra from Brazil talks about how culture influences the way people think, emphasizing how young people, artists, and educators can use it to raise awareness around sustainable lifestyles. So we'll keep moving forward. The next paragraph we'll look at is paragraph 8. Now, note that we're not going through the entire CGST. We've consolidated all of the highlights from the inputs we've received, and we're looking at the text around which we've received inputs. So this one is acknowledging that culture is both a driver and enabler of climate action. It makes references to the implementation of the Paris Agreement as well as the global goal on adaptation. And then here are the inputs. So Daniel from Burkina Faso speaks of recognizing culture as a driver enabler of climate action. I know Daniel's been involved in organizing the consultation in Burkina Faso as well, so appreciate the the regionally specific note here. And then Daniel also mentions the importance of locally grounded solutions and long-term behavioral transformations. Wilfred from Kenya talks about recognizing culture as a driver of an enabler of climate action. So mirroring the language we already have and includes community identity and intergenerational stewardship. And then Brankica from Serbia also reaffirms the text that you've seen in the prior slide, speaking about fostering social cohesion, enhancing public engagement. So again, this is one of the paragraphs in the CGST that we're very happy to see reaffirmed by inputs from consultations. So on the next slide, let's start talking about gaps and suggested edits. This is where we'll spend most of the time for each section. So here's a paragraph from the outcomes of the CGST section, which speaks of, which essentially lists a variety of cultural practitioners, specifically highlighting Indigenous and people of African descent knowledge holders, and then it lists researchers, artisans, curators, chefs. So a recommendation that we've received on the next slide is about enhancing this definition a bit more. So the Yango constituency recommends changing art teachers to educators. Matteo from Switzerland recommends adding cultural educators, and the ENC core drafting committee recommends adding artivists as well. So I'm going to pause there and just remind us on the methodology. With the suggestions and edits requested, we're going to assume that there is consensus and move forward with them unless we see disagreement in the chat. Now, you might not see this exact language recommended, not this exact language included in draft two, because we are still waiting for more consultations to come in and we'll consolidate all of the inputs and then update draft two. But if we have consensus on these edits, the core of the suggested edits will in fact be included in the second draft. And if you feel very strongly about an edit, feel free to add a series of pluses in the chat as Sam has done. All right. So let's move forward to the next section where we've received a recommendation. Can we go back to the last slide, please, just to allow everyone to take a look? So in this section, we recognize various policy frameworks that are in place around protecting cultural heritage and the role of cultural rights. You'll see a large list over here, and then we've received some great recommendations on expanding this further on the next slide. So Claire from Netherlands has recommended that we also include UNESCO's to 2015 recommendations, which also cover museums and the preservation of documentary heritage. Specifically, Claire has also recommended that we include the definition of cultural property in the UNESCO 1954 Hague Convention, which is more comprehensive. And so if there is, we think this can be a great way to further expand the set of policy frameworks we reference in the CGST. If there's no disagreement, we'll keep moving forward. All right. So this paragraph is again, we've read this before in the reaffirming section. So we're going to talk about the gaps in this paragraph, which references Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. Claire again recommends that we strengthen the language here and specifically mention culturally appropriate cross-cutting considerations with language affirming that it is a transversal prerequisite. All right. The next section references the outcome document of Mondial 2025 around the right to take part in cultural life and the recognition of cultural rights as human rights. Let's look at some of the suggestions we have received around this. So Claire has once again recommended that we concretize this language a bit more. She mentions that Mondial Cult affirms cultural rights, but this is a reaffirmation and more than a shared vision. We can point out that upholding cultural rights is an obligation of states specifically, and doing so can also include the right to participate in the right to benefit from scientific progress and freely express creativity and intellectual pursuits. It is upheld to make sure that this is upheld in the process of climate action and not impeded by climate change. The critical part here is to recognize the implementation of this as an obligation of states. All right, I'm seeing a lot of support for this in the chat, which is wonderful. We can keep moving forward in the interest of time. Another suggestion that we have is from Marta from Spain, and this suggestion is to specifically include the Culture 2030 goal campaign. So we'll leave this on the screen for a second if you'd like to read this in detail. We think this is a great suggestion. This is a bit technical, but we have also included references to the Culture 2030 campaign in our guidance for the way forward. So we'll get to that tomorrow as well. But just generally noting that the idea to reference this is well received. All right, we can keep moving forward. And then this section, again, we've looked at it before. It references the global goal on adaptation. It notes concern on some instances where culture also has barriers, such as ecological footprint, co-optation of fossil fuel-based and other extractive industries, and the production of waste. Let's see the suggestions we've received so far. All right, so the ENC team, like we've mentioned before, a lot of this language begins with recognizes. So we want to consider changing the prefacing verb to make it more action-oriented. So request parties to recognize, or underlines, or strongly reaffirms, and then perhaps moving this to a different place of greater prominence. And then Marta has again suggested a reference to a technical analysis of interaction between the culture and the SDGs presented by the GTF and UCLG through the report, A Cultural Boost in the Achievement of the SDGs. We think this is a great suggestion. It is a bit technical, so our recommendation would be perhaps to move this to a section in the appendix where we cite this research to add greater legitimacy. All right, we'll keep moving forward. So the CGST also notes that the creative industries represent 3.39% of the global GDP and 3.55% of global employment. The inputs we received on this is that the percentage of the GDP might be inaccurate and might be a larger number. So we welcome recommendations from experts in the chat who can help us improve this estimate. one thing we will note here is that this text is about the creative industry. So it's not about the cultural ecosystem at large. So the creative industries include things like film, TV, fashion. We'd be very happy to update this number, add the correct citation to ensure that it more accurately reflects the size of the creative industries and global GDP. We can keep moving along. I do see a note in the chat from Catherine Morris about respects as a right, honors as a right. Catherine, which point was this about? Is this still the eighth one? Prior slide. Ah, okay. So it says acknowledging that culture is both a driver, and is the recommendation that we make it respect culture as a right?
It was regarding the slide that comes right after this, and you're talking about more actionable language. It's just
Ah,
this.
okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. All right. We've made note of that. And then Sarah has a point in chat. Beyond its economic dimension, the creative economy raises important climate justice questions about how resources are distributed and who benefits from them. Low-income communities most affected by climate change are often included in cultural initiatives without gaining sustainable economic opportunities, which highlights the need to ensure that investments in culture and creativity directly strengthen the autonomy and resilience of vulnerable communities. Thank you. This is a great addition. We're going to make note of this and include it in our discussion of the creative economy. I see that this is also getting a lot of support in the chat. I will take that as note of general consensus and we will include that. Thank you. All right. We'll keep soldiering on. Okay, so this part of the first section recognizes the importance of climate justice and underscores that cultural knowledge systems, heritage practices, and creative expression play a critical role in protecting affected communities. So we'll look at the inputs we have received. So Matteo from Switzerland recommends expanding the definition of cultural expression to also include cultural practices as spaces for experimentation, emotional engagement, and collective learning that can support social transformation and community resilience. If there's no further feedback on this, we'll keep moving forward. I
Can
see,
you hear?
I see Anna, you have your hand raised. Do you want to take a minute to share what you have, what feedback you have?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ana. I'm from Brazil, and also I'm sorry, there is a lot of noise here. I'm Ana. I'm youth leader at UN Women Feminist Action Coalition for Climate Justice, and I want to know if in this paragraph is possible we include something about heritage and women and how they make this process of continuing heritage. If in this paragraph it's we can include that, or if you have another one that someone says that we can add about this about woman and gender.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing two things here. One is about the preservation of heritage and the continuation of
Yeah, and the
heritage-based
importance of
knowledge.
the yeah and the importance of woman in this process. So I think maybe we can add that in this paragraph, or if we have another paragraph or someone indicate some place to include that, because it's, if no, we can continue and try to see if we can add this gender perspectives in other paragraph.
Thank you. That's a great recommendation. I know we have a variety of places where we mention just like focusing on
Yeah,
underserved groups,
I
but I
read
think
the I read the first draft and we don't have any mentions to woman or gender in any place of the draft. So I think it's something we can discuss maybe later.
100%. Thank you. We're going to note that we think this is a gap and we will add it further. And like Sam mentioned, some of this is also tackled in the adaptation section, but important to include in the first section as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to keep moving forward. Thank you, everyone, for the great suggestions. So in this next paragraph, we talk about the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems. We go on to define some of these ecosystems and talk about the importance of the relationship and of reciprocity between human and non-human life. So let's look at some of the inputs we've received. This is a simple recommendation to add agroforestry as we continue in our definition of human and non-human life. So we'll keep moving forward. So now let's talk about some new paragraph suggestions that we've received. So this is not necessarily responding to an existing paragraph, but net new and still adding it to the first section, which is the preamble or introduction. So Rosie from the Center for the Ethics for United States recommends that we cite the July 2025 International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion 1, and that we welcome it, which affirmed that failure of a state to take appropriate action to protect the climate system from greenhouse gas emissions may constitute an internationally wrongful act, which is attributable to the state, and recognizing that this legal accountability extends to the protection of cultural heritage, indigenous territorial rights, and knowledge systems. We think that this addresses an important gap in the CGST, which is speaking more explicitly to legal pipelines for using culture as a tool for climate action. So we think this could be a great addition. And then this is actually an input that we received before the majority of the parties in the UN and member states voted in favor of this. So it's even more timely to consider. And if there's any further feedback, we're happy to integrate that within this edition. All right. Great. The next suggestion we have is from Ian, which is Ian from the UK, which is around the gaps and challenges that remain in structurally integrating culture into the global climate framework. Progress so far has largely been declarative and project-based rather than built into the core architectures of climate governance. Only a minority of countries mention culture or heritage in their nationally determined contributions or national adaptation plans. We think that this is a great point to highlight, and further helps identify the gaps in the implementation of culture-based climate action moving beyond frameworks. All right, I'm seeing pluses in the chat for this. We'll keep moving forward. And this is from Philip in the US. These are a few points that are essentially about recognizing the role and the importance of climate activism in the movement. We think this is integral and addresses a gap because without the work of activists and grassroots movements, none of the policy framework would exist. So thank you very much, Philip. If there's anything else you'd like to add that is not already covered in the slide, please feel free to raise your hand, and thank you for your suggestion. All right. Great. So with that, we've come to an end to the first section, which is outcomes of the CGST. Thank you for all of the inputs you've shared in chat as well. We're saving the chat, we're taking notes of everything mentioned in the call, and this will absolutely inform the second draft. All right. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Gosha to talk about context and cross-cutting considerations, which is the second section of the CGST.
Thank you very much, Sanya, for your introduction as well as for sharing with our participants today the first slides and the first inputs and how we work based on our methodology for the consultations. I have the pleasure to discuss with you the context and cross-cutting consideration for the entire document. So please, next slide. What are the key facts of this session which lays foundation for the entire document? So this is the baseline that we elaborated together in order to frame the approach. It also frames the climate change not only as an environmental, but also social, economic, and cultural crisis. We also emphasize the equity, indigenous and local knowledges. We already addressed this in the previous paragraphs, how we want to align as well with ACE and biodiversity, mass information, other aspects that are crucial for how we also understand culture. We had a lot of discussion on how to frame culture per se. That's why we also developed the ecosystem approach, which is reflected here, and the cross-cutting section is also reinforcing this framing to make sure we are all on the same page. The role of this paragraph is to establish some principles for the later sections and to make sure we are coherent. We are also avoiding some repetitions. So you will also see throughout the consultation that some suggestions were made to other paragraphs, and we have the answer that this is already integrated somewhere else. So this is also important to highlight that you may find some key aspect summarized in the narrative. We can move on where I will show you some alignment examples, and then we can move to the next one, which is the paragraph 16. I will briefly go through this paragraph, which emphasizes that culture-based climate action and solutions must be grounded in equity, justice, and inclusive participation, and recognizes cultural ecosystems as interdependent systems that sustain relationships between human and non-human life across generation. Further recognizes that indigenous people, local communities, people of African descent, women, children, and youth, older persons, migrants, refugees, LGBTIQA plus people, religious and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and other historically excluded groups are disproportionately affected by climate impact, while also serving as custodians of knowledge and key transmitters of cultural heritage, and affirms the protection and realization of cultural rights and integral to just climate action and environmental stewardship. We can look the next one to show you as well how we see some comments reinforcing this framing. So we have, for example, PUNET for India, with the comment that for disabled people and other marginalized communities, these cultural disruptions are compounded. Climate crises such as extreme heat, flooding, and air pollution reshapes not only environments, but also access to cultural spaces, rituals, and social participations, which reinforce our framing of climate crisis as well as social crisis and cultural crisis. And Ian from United Kingdom also added a comment that reinforces framing by saying emphasize cultural-based climate action must be grounded in equity and justice. So this is basically what we had in the draft one, which is here repeated by Ian. This being said, we can go to the next paragraph where we already see as well alignment with comments kindly provided during the open consultation period. So the paragraph 17 reaffirms that climate change is not only an environmental, social, and economic challenge, but also a cultural one, as climate disruption affects sacred landscape, cultural heritage sites and practices, community identities, and traditional practices that shape relationship between societies and the natural world. Then we can move forward to the comments that we have received for PUNET from India. In that case, climate change is often framed through environmental indicators such as temperature rise, biodiversity loss, and pollution. But as rightly highlighted, they are profoundly cultural, and climate disruption alter the rituals, sacred geographies, livelihoods, and collective memories that shape community identity. So I think this is already present and integrated. This being said, we can go to the next slide with paragraph 18 from the same section, which underscores the essential role of indigenous knowledge system, traditional ecological knowledge, and community-based cultural practices in supporting climate adaptation, ecological stewardship, and resilient governance systems, and strongly reaffirms that this knowledge system should be respected, protected, and integrated alongside scientific knowledge. We can move to the next one with comments that we have received from Rosie from the US, which commented that acknowledging that indigenous and traditional knowledge system represent distinct, rigorous, and irrepressible epistemologies that must be formally integrated alongside Western science and climate decision-making, including through co-creation of knowledge, meaningful participation in negotiating spaces, and the protection of rights of knowledge holders. I think this was already highlighted as well in the section that Sanya presented, that we put a lot of emphasis of the voices from the majority world, and we put a lot of emphasis as well to integrate various knowledge systems and to learn from traditional knowledge systems. So this is also integrated across the document. We have another comment on that from Ibrahim from Morocco, that climate action should be grounded in equity, cultural diversity, in intergenerational inclusion. This one is, I won't read the entire one to be mindful about the time, but I think this one is important for us because of the nomadic communities, youth and local cultural actors that are among those most affected by climate impacts. I think the nomadic context should be integrated and reinforced indeed. And in any case, what Ibrahim said is already integrated in the draft so far. We can move to the next one. I think this will be 19. Yes, this one highlights that climate change is paramount concern for younger generations and underscores the role of arts and culture in strengthening climate awareness, enabling behavioral change and fostering creativity and imagination in responding to environmental crises, connecting with nature, and encourages partnerships between cultural and educational institutions to integrate arts and heritage-based climate learning into formal education system as part of broader climate literacy efforts and reimagining futures. What also resonates with previous comments, we have the educational aspect here, so it also reinforces what was in the previous paragraph with comments on adding cultural educators. And we have again comments from Punet from India, reinforcing that by saying that stories, rituals, and collective memory shape how societies understand environmental responsibility, and cultural narratives helps communities visualize alternative futures and mobilize collective actions. By emphasizing diverse cultural perspective, especially from marginalized communities, we expand the ethical foundations of climate change action. I think we have it very well integrated in the paragraph by having the aspect of anticipating alternative futures and the power of culture allowing to do so. We have another comment from Peter from Kenya. Intergenerational participation is also essential. Youth and children are key actors in environmental restoration and future climate leadership. Programs that promote environmental education, forest clubs, storytelling, cultural festivals, free growing, traditional ecological knowledge transfer help build long-term climate resilience, and indeed grows the feeling of responsibility among younger generation, but also makes this feeling of responsibility visible. We have the intergenerational participation dialogue already integrated, so I think this one is well represented so far. We can move to the next one when we see need for future adaptation as well, and we acknowledge the importance of adding some for the edits, for example, in the context of paragraph 16 that I already presented. I think we don't have to repeat this one, but so we can go to the next one, which is from Philip from the United States, and says that emphasizes that culture-based climate action and solution must be grounded in equity, justice, and inclusive participation, which necessitates the equivocal protection of civic space and the fundamental human rights of indigenous people, youth, environmental defenders, and grassroots cultural stewards to peacefully assemble and advocate for the futures without facing state violence, persecution, and unjust criminalization. I think this is a slightly new framing that we will need to consider, perhaps, because so far I remember we don't have much about violence and unjust criminalization, but I fully understand the political context that is addressed here. And I see as well that we have comments, so over to you, Usra, please share your thoughts with us.
Hello everyone, my name is Strawberry, a young advocate originally from Afghanistan and currently based in Brazil. I'm grateful to be a part of this important conversation on climate and culture, climate action, and youth participation. I believe climate action is not only about policies or technology, but also about people, culture, and how communities understand and respond to change. Culture plays a key role in shaping awarenesses, values, and collective responsibility across generations. Young people today are not only affected by climate change, but also active contribute to solution through creativity, innovation, and community engagement. However, meaningful youth solution still are not fully realized in many decision-making space. For this reason, I strongly believe we need more inclusive and continuous platform where youth voices are not only heard, but also connected to the real opportunities for action and collaboration. Through education, storytelling, and intercultural dialogue, youth can help strengthen awarenesses and build stronger connections between communities and climate action. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. It's amazing that you are here and you are sharing your experience. This is all well noted, and we fully recognize the role of people like you in changing this document and shaping and co-creating it. So thank you very much.
You're
I think
welcome.
this being said, thank you. We can move to the next one, which is the next paragraph that is under further consideration to make some edits. This one underscores the essential. Yeah, okay, we can go to the yes, meaningful participation in negotiating spaces. I think this also resonates very well with what Uzra said with us, that it's not only about flagging some issue, but also taking part in negotiation and being part of the decision-making processes. So I think this can be easily added to the paragraph 18. We can go to the next one, the 19, on exactly, on the young generation and the role of arts and culture in triggering climate awareness, enabling behavioral change, and fostering creativity and imagination in responding to environmental crisis, connecting with nature and encouraging partnership between cultural and educational institutions to integrate arts and heritage-based climate learning. We did have this one before, so let's go to the suggestion that was being made by Yungo constituency to emphasize more youth-led creative efforts and perhaps add at the end of the paragraph further recognize youth not only as beneficiaries of climate action, but as creators of transformative climate narrative, digital cultures, artistic resistance, and community-led adaptation practices. This resonates a lot with comments that we received in general, so perhaps we need to take into consideration how to reinforce the role of the young generation. We have also one from Matteo from Switzerland, from the recent consultation in Switzerland that was conducted, I think, 2 weeks ago, suggested edit on this paragraph, connecting with nature and creating accessible spaces for participation, dialogue, and collective imagination, and encourage partnerships between cultural and educational institutions, including non-formal education systems as part of broader climate literacy. And we have here an addition on young people must have access to cultural resources and education, which allow them to develop skills and agency for their futures. I think we have similar comments across the documents and the consultation processes, so it calls for more focus on education with various facets of it, including non-formal one, and access to cultural resources for younger people to develop skills and agency, again, with the context of futures, and I think reimagination. I don't see any further comments on that. I see some comments in the chat, but I will refer to them at the very end of the section if it's okay for you. So we can go to the next one. More nuanced international exchange. We have one comment from Vanessa from Uganda. True culture information is transmitted from one generation to another. Even before the invention of the internet, culture found ways to share and convey information, from sitting around open fires, listening to our elders share our relationship with the environment through songs and poems, to dancing and concerts that raises climate support for communities. We have seen the power of culture in driving the climate conversation forward. Indigenous communities have also taught us that culture is not just about us as human beings, it's also about all life around us. So it also highlights the non-human agency in the entire web of life. I think we have some reference to this very beautiful comment across the documents and about the role of culture as the vehicle of transmitting some values. So I suppose we can take this comment as well, perhaps to integrate it and check whether it is sufficiently represented in the document so far. We can go to the next one, which is still about the context and cross-cutting consideration. Paragraph 22 emphasizes the importance of promoting narrative and information integrity and strengthening multilateralism by connecting climate processes with people on the ground and accelerating the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and recognize the role of cultural ecosystem in avoiding societal polarization and addressing misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, greenwashing, and environmental narratives through transparent, evidence-based climate communication. And let's see what were the suggestions made during the open consultation process. We have one from Claudia from France to add more nuance into this direction by considering further emphasize the importance of promoting inclusive, diverse, and culturally relevant narratives that reflect a plurality of socio-cultural contexts, recognizing that pathway towards low greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient development must be locally grounded, context-specific, and socially equitable. I think this can be integrated too. I have the feeling that we have already some of those aspects reflected throughout the document, but I think the issue of plurality can be highlighted in that somewhere else. I don't see immediate comments on this one. I don't also see too many pluses in the comments, so I assume everyone agrees. Nevertheless, if there are no immediate comments, so please move to the next one, which is paragraph 29. Encourages businesses and institutions across the cultural and creative industries to strengthen corporate social responsibility and climate leadership through transparent sustainability practices, science-based climate targets, and responsible production models aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And let's see what are the suggestions on this paragraph on the next slide, please. We have a comment from Karima from the United States. This needs to be higher up. Okay, we can discuss a different placement for this paragraph. I think it's also about the corporate aspect that comes perhaps in slightly late. Unless businesses totally reimagine their purpose and profit models, the leadership culture and governance and what they sell to investors, this paragraph is going to fall short. That's a risk because 30% of global greenhouse gas emission belongs to big businesses. We can check whether we can reinforce this framing when it comes to businesses and the impact, being mindful that we need to focus on the cultural ecosystems as well and how the link to businesses makes the perfect sense in the context of the entire narrative, but this is well noted and will be reflected for the next drafts. Okay, we can move to the next one. Oh, I see, Karima, you are in the meeting, so if there is anything that I missed, please feel free as well to comment. We have as well a suggestion to include mental health from Bruce Kahn. Culture-based climate action can strengthen social cohesion, reduce isolation and burnout, and create pathways for long-term engagement beyond fear-based climate communication. Very well framed. Young people are increasingly turning towards artistic and community-led spaces to process ecological grief, uncertainty, burnout, and feelings of helplessness associated with the climate crisis. I think we have several spaces where we already mentioned mental health, but of course it can be perhaps moved higher up to make sure this is one of the crucial considerations also in the context of younger people who are as clearly highlighted here affected in a very negative way when it comes to well-being and the fears and uncertainties that are currently rising. Okay, we can move to the next one if there is anyone left for this paragraph. No, so this is it. I think, is there anything crucial that we need to address from the comments in the chat? I will skim in. We have auto rights, yes. Okay, from some about the mental health, okay. We have an important comment concerning the consultation from LA. Yes, I will reinforce that this is something that we need to check. We have another suggested addition in the impact of access to participation in communal cultural activities on individual and those public health. Connection is a key indicator predictor of quality of life and health outcome. We have already Samuel who checked this one. Okay, happy to support. We have on arts education, cultural mediation. I think we don't have too much about cultural mediation. This is something that we can also integrate in the next draft. I think we have most of them covered so far. When I see a lot of emphasis on a younger generation mental health, but also space issues when it comes to access to spaces where cultural activities are provided and who is allowed or included to take advantage of them, and also an issue of author rights and I suppose the freedom of speech. We have also necessity to mention food systems. We have it somewhere. I think this was also mentioned at the very beginning of the paragraph that provides the framework and the context. This being said, I don't want to take too much time from the next section. So if there are no immediate comments and nobody is raising hands, I will hand over to my colleagues to discuss the mitigation section.
Hi everyone, so happy to see y'all here. My name is Lila. I'll be taking over the mitigation section and happy to continue with some key facts. So if we go to the next slide. Well, the mitigation section then focuses on how these cultural ecosystems then can help reduce emissions and also shift social norms. So here we're covering both science-based and heritage-based decarbonization pathways, transitioning away from fossil fuels, emissions data gaps, and low carbon production, sustainability, mobility, supply chains, and its connection to the cultural ecosystem. A very important part of what we're trying to do here is making sure that these points connect to existing mechanisms such as the UNFCCC Nazca and the Race to Zero. So let's check on some of those alignment examples. So we have around 18 paragraphs within the mitigation section, and here we're going to jump into a couple of these specific ones. The first one is around evidence from the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, showcases the high confidence that social norms, identity, and cultural values significantly influence consumption patterns and lifestyle choices, including dietary behavior. The report further notes that engagement by approximately 10 to 30% of influential actors within social networks can contribute to the establishment of new social norms supportive of climate action. So we see this as a very key paragraph, and we see on the next slide as well some agreements. And I've taken a note that there are 40 contributions already to mitigation, which makes me super proud. And one of them is here from Darlene Martinez from Mexico, emphasizing the importance of this paragraph. If we move towards the next one, here we also talk about paragraph 47, where we acknowledge the cultural production and media industries have historically contributed to the normalization of high consumption lifestyles and economic models dependent on fossil fuels, while also recognizing their potential to accelerate the transition towards low carbon society. So this can include things such as lower consumption, regenerative and sustainable lifestyles, and making all of these more desirable. On the next page, we see also some agreements from Japan, Burkina Faso, and Ghana, which is fantastic, seeing all of these examples come through with specific wordings that is valuable to them. So we have a note from Japan that really focuses on the fact that culture and creative industries must transition from promoting extractive consumption. We have a comment from Burkina Faso from Daniel that talks about cultural norms and values in shaping these consumption patterns. And we also have a point from Lord from Ghana that says that the creative and media industries hold the megaphone. So we really see a key agreement towards this specific paragraph. If we go to the next slide as well, I see already some comments further in the chat, but I believe that they are from the ones before. So if we're looking into gaps and suggested edits, I'll read through this paragraph. I'll share some specific edits, and if there's anything as a reminder, feel free to also drop it into the chat. So the paragraph reads, 41 urges the development of standardized methodologies, sector-wide benchmarks, and transparent reporting, monitoring, and evaluation systems to measure, aggregate, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, waste, and resource use across the cultural and creative industries, and notes the absence of unified global data sets and the existing approaches remain fragmented and unevenly distributed across regions and subsectors. Thus, encourages expanded and more inclusive data collection, as well as greater coordination and interoperability of methodologies, including where appropriate, alignment with existing reporting platforms such as the UNFCCC portal or complementary national and regional systems. So this one's very important as well for us to think about what's already available. So if we go to the next slide, we have a point here about by TBA 21 and notes with appreciation emerging initiatives towards a shared international sustainability standard for arts and cultural organizations as voluntary reference framework to support sector-wide environmental, social, and governance reporting aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And if we go to the next one, we have also a detailed overview from Brazil that talks about this point around the structure, responsibility, and the individual. So they believe that a lot of companies don't really have the potential of avoiding working for organizations that are promoting fossil fuels, especially within the context of Brazil, because this could lead to professionals and companies going into bankruptcy. And they believe we should focus on a more balanced regulatory approach following methodologies such as from tobacco advertising, alcohol advertising, and advertising directed towards children. So any comments, feel free to drop in the chat. I'm looking here from the previous section, a plus on how creative industries influence. So around the public imagination, cultural norms, misinformation, customer behavior, and political will. I remember we had a big discussion in Marrakesh around misinformation and disinformation. So we have an entire paragraph on that as well. So happy to see that coming up. I also see a note on creative industries also influence how young people understand climate issues, which makes misinformation awareness and responsible communication very important. Exactly. Feel free to drop in the chat. I will just continue over to the next paragraph, and anything else that comes up, feel free to drop it. So paragraph 43 urges cultural institutions, production companies, festivals, and event organizers to accelerate the transition towards low carbon cultural production, including through fair renewable energy use, circular design and sustainable materials, electrified production infrastructure, and the phase out of diesel generators at cultural venues, sound stages, and event productions. And we have one suggested edit here, which is from Claire. For some cultural institutions, the choice to adapt isn't always within their hands. So we should really focus on the decision makers, the budget holders within specific ministries at the national or local level to focus on these solutions. So not, again, once again, thinking about the power between the local individual contributor and policies that exist within a national or local framework. I see lots of pluses and lots of agreements. So fantastic. I think we can jump to the next one. Cool. So paragraph 44 recognizes the role of cities and local governments in enabling these low carbon cultural ecosystems, including through access of renewable energy grids, sustainable mobility systems, climate resilient cultural infrastructure, and also just talks about the general infrastructure around these cultural ecosystems that are cross-sectoral. So this one specifically is getting us to think about the importance of cities and local governments. And I think to the point that we saw below, not only do we need to talk to the organizations that are directly contributing to this work, but the organizations, the governments that actually create these policies. So if we go to the next slide, Marta from Spain adds a specific point around highlighting the importance of having already well-established operational frameworks that enable the culture and climate cross-sectoral action. So there's a specific framework called Culture 21 Plus framework that talks about all of these topics. And within it, they discuss how cities and territories can evaluate their current policies and design new local strategies that generally connect these cultural rights to climate action. So here it provides a really practical methodology to align culture and heritage with climate action. So really curious to hear if there are other frameworks that you all might know that we should take a note of and add in footnotes and also add as part of this specific paragraph or another. I see a plus on the chat as well. Great, great. Participatory art for social impact. Is that a specific framework, Tanisha? Perfect.
Yeah, I'll
Yes.
share the link. Maybe it might be a value add if it makes sense. I'll send it across.
A very big value add. Please, please do. Amazing. Let's jump over to the next one. And I will do the same on my computer so I can read a little bit bigger. We're on paragraph 48, and here it urges parties to recognize the role of advertising, public relations, branding, and media infrastructures in shaping public perceptions and social norms around energy systems, and calls cultural and creative professionals to align their professional practices with climate science and the goals of the Paris Agreement, including by refraining from communications, campaigns, or partnerships that advance fossil fuel expansion or delay the transition to renewable energy systems. And I think we have also another comment from Sarah here from Brazil. Here she discusses the importance of considering the initiatives for companies reporting emissions, so that there's already a system that gathers all of these voluntary climate commitments. And the idea of these tax initiatives for climate transparency is coherent with emergent climate policies. So these could include tax benefits when these companies do actually report their inventories, such as tax deductions or facilitated access to cultural funding calls, scoring within cultural public policies. So these specific funding calls could assign additional points if a partner reports, a company reports emissions or maintains these carbon neutrality targets. So really, really great and really interesting to see these connected to the race to zero. And I think somebody here, Philip, has mentioned this would be a good place to highlight the damage of AI in data centers. Yes, there's an entire section around technology where we have many, many points around AI. So thank you so much for raising that. And do check out the technology section to give more comments on that. And Catherine here mentions edit and add social perception and behavioral norms. Perfect. We have a team taking notes, and we'll make sure to add that as well. And I see Tanisha has shared with us the link. Thank you very much. If we go to the next slide, we see Philip from the US has a specific paragraph suggestion. And here we're going to start with a couple of different paragraph suggestions as well. Here he would like one that states, acknowledges that cultural interventions, including peaceful civil disobedience and disruptive artivism, are critical methodologies for challenging the social license of the fossil fuel industry, urges parties to protect the civic space for these actions as necessary condition to dismantle extractive narratives and accelerate a just, orderly, and equitable transition from fossil fuels. So really great suggestion on connecting cultural work with also the possibility of civil disobedience. We see some claps and we see some plus, plus, plus. And I know Samuel knows every single paragraph, so he can also add in the chat if he knows if we've included something like this. And if we haven't, great addition from Philip. If we go towards the next new paragraph suggestion, this is also from the US, but from Rosie. She would like one that states reaffirming decision 1 CMA.5 paragraph 28D, very specific, which called for the transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, accelerating action in a critical decade so as to achieve net zero by 2050. This is a great one because we're really looking for what already exists out there. So if you have any further suggestions and can be as specific as Rosie, that's beautiful. Perfect. Any comments? And we will continue over to next paragraph. We have Claudia from France, which suggests that this paragraph comes right after paragraph 49 around corporate narrative responsibility and recognizes that companies across all sectors bear a shared responsibility in avoiding high emission consumption patterns and supporting more sustainable and regenerative lifestyles through their corporate communication, branding, marketing strategies, and consumer engagement practices, and therefore calls upon all companies to reflect these practices within the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And I think we do discuss a lot about corporate and narrative suggestions, and we can look into how this one directly connects with some of those as well. Perfect. Seeing the chat is pretty okay. If we go on to the next one, please. We have a plus plus for Claudia. Great. So we have Roberta from Romania, UK, with a new paragraph after paragraph 44, which states that she recognizes architectural practices as a form of cultural knowledge production whose material outputs, including buildings or urban morphologies, landscapes, and public spaces, directly shape the carbon performance, ecological integrity, and social resilience of the built environment, and encourages the integration of architectural culture, including its heritage, pedagogical traditions, and professional ethics into culture-based climate action frameworks. Fantastic. I see a comment. I think it is on this one. On this point, we could connect it to the responsibility of reporting. Is this for this new paragraph from Roberta or Claudia? On the corporate, I think it's the corporate one, right? Perfect. Okay. So please, team, taking notes, add that one in. Anything around architectural, feel free to drop in the chat as well. And Samuel, around this reporting piece, has also said that this will be adjusted in paragraph 41. And Ursula also agrees because this helps us ensure long-term impact and trust in these initiatives. Brilliant. If we go to the next one, we're here. Yes, perfect. We continue from Roberta. She has the last paragraph, which recognizes that vernacular and traditional building knowledge systems, including passive environmental design strategies, indigenous material technologies, and place-based spatial practices developed across diverse climatic and cultural contexts constitute a documented and recoverable body of low-carbon architectural intelligence that can directly inform contemporary design, urban planning, and building retrofit, and encourages the integration of this knowledge into architectural education, professional practice standards, and national adaptation planning processes in full consultation with the communities from which it originates, respecting the principles of free, prior, and informed consent as set out in paragraph 152. I think this is a great one, and I think it also relates to the point that it's important for us to be including other type of cultural practitioners and recognizing architectural practitioners in here as well. So if you know of anyone that's a brilliant architecture professional, share the CGST with them, ask for their opinion so we make sure that we can incorporate as many different culture-related professions, viewpoints, and additions as well. So I really loved both of these points from Roberta. I think they brought a lot. I also add that this should be related back to participatory budgeting as well. Love, love, love. Thank you. Samuel agrees. He doesn't think this is in finance. So great point. And we see lots of pluses. I think that's it for me. We got through this one really quickly and happy to pass it over to adaptation.
Hi, my name is Sara. I'm from Brazil, and I'm going to be presenting the adaptation part of the presentation. I'm going to share it with you right now. Just 1 second. It's saying that it's disabled for sharing the...
Don't worry about it, Sarah. Kat's sharing screen, so she'll keep advancing slides.
Oh, perfect, yes. So, yeah, we can start from here. So, the adaptation section explains how culture, heritage, and knowledge systems support resilience. It connects to the Article 7 of the Paris Agreement, the Global Goal of Adaptation, Cultural Heritage, Target 9G, the Land Adaptation Indicators, NAPs, Locally Led Adaptation, Cultural Landscapes, Storytelling, Risk Awareness, and the role of cultural infrastructure as community resilience hubs. It also identifies the gaps in finance, technical guidance, and implementation. So let's follow for the alignment examples that we have so far. So in the paragraph 56, notes with concern that the IPCC 6 assessment synthesis report found that climate change is driving cultural losses related to tangible, intangible, and living heritage, threatening adaptive capacity, and may result in irrevocable and home, particularly for indigenous people, local communities, and people of African descent, and those more directly relying on the environment for subsistence and affected by the climate change. So let's move to the next one. So here we have some inputs from Lord from Ghana, and it's very nice because there are many different places here. And so for Lord, adaptation isn't just building seawalls, it's preventing the heritage and identify of communities facing displacement. When you lose a language or traditional farming technique due to climate change, you lose a survival tool. Resilience is built on cultural memory. So Rosie from the USA, noting with concern that the IPCC 6th assessment report found that climate change is already driving irreversible cultural losses, including tangible and intangible, the adaptive capacity of communities and resulting in the loss of cultural identity, sense of belonging, and place-based knowledge, particularly for indigenous peoples and those directly reliant on their environments. And finally, I have Sirin from France, and notes with concern the limited availability of dedicated funding streams for cultural-based climate solutions, and recognize the existing climate finance mechanism must expand beyond traditional green infrastructure to invest in cultural actors, heritage institutions, youth networks, and creative industries. So I think it's very interesting because here we can see that is so important for culture, is so important for survival, and very nice to see it being seen here. So the adaptation paragraph here encourages the implementation of integrated and multi-sector adaptation solutions, including sustainable land stewardship, resilient food systems that we were talking before that should be here in some paragraph, system and ecosystem-based approaches that protect, conserve, and restore ecosystem, such as forests, mountains, and coastal environments, recognizing that these approaches can enhance community resilience and well-being while driving on the best available science, as well as indigenous people's knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and local culture values, practice and knowledge systems that guide sustainability, resource stewardship, collective action, and behavior change. So, oh, nice. Here I have like comment from Jazib from the Netherlands. Indigenous and local communities possess generations of ecological knowledge capable of informing sustainable adaptation strategies, yet the system remains underrepresented with formal climate governance. Adaptation frameworks should therefore support community-led cultural infrastructures, oral tradition, traditional ecological knowledge, and locally grounded resilience while recognizing cultural ecosystems as essential spaces for social cohesion, climate literacy, and disasters preparedness. Let me just see here because I think we have some inputs here in the chat. So, yes. Yeah, like we have the input from Uzra Baraki, and she's talking about the participatory budgeting that is important for climate change, for climate and culture initiatives, more inclusive and community-driven. So thank you, that's very important. I think it will be very strong in the final document. You can move to the next one. So let's go to the gaps and adaptation notes with the, so we are here with the, talking about the 61 paragraph. So notes with the concern that paragraph 7 of decision, CMA 7, relating to Belém adaptation indicators, establishes that these indicators are voluntary, no prospective, no punitive, and facilitative in nature, and encourages straining and supported recording of the agreed upon indicators to better assess progress, assess finance, increase accountability, and accelerate implementation. So yes, here we have a lot of plus here that I think people are agreeing with what's being pointed. So here we have a node that is not directly related, but also flags issues with the GGA. So Jenny from the USA, as part of the Heritage Adapts of Climate Alliance, CHN notes that critical issues with the GGA decision at COP30 include the failure to address ethical engagement with indigenous people and local communities, whose knowledge is to be used in practical overuse of percentage-based indicators, and answered questions of how culture will be factored into other thematics, including the integration of nature and culture, and in addition to maladaptation. This can also be a new paragraph, so it's an indication of a new paragraph after 61 to emphasize the point of engaging indigenous and local communities in adaptation efforts. So yes, I think it will be there. I think it's a very strong line from the document as well. That can be fortified. Next one. So yeah, and then I think that the comment of Anna can be very can make it more strong about the comment before when she's talking about the authorial rights, because it's something that really happens in indigenous communities and peripheral communities. There's when people take their identity and culture and take to other places without paying them for that or giving them authorial rights. And you also have here from Natalia Gagini a suggestion of inclusion to the clause 68 about the 5 indicators. So I'll follow here because it's a little bit big, but I think it's important for everyone to see it here because it's a very important contribution to the document. And in the 63 encourages local government cultural ecosystem to support parties in the collection of data and reporting of indicators under Target 9 of the Global Goal of Adaptation Framework, with a view to facilitating the integration of cultural heritage and cultural ecosystem considerations into national adaptation plans, adaptation communication, and other relevant reporting mechanisms. Here you have a comment from Claire from Netherlands. Could encourage coordination with cultural ministries and related agencies. That is a very important thing. And I think here is important what Samuel is also pointing, that we have some kind of limitations in what we can put or not in the document to be valid, because some things don't depend on us. So I think it's nice to see that. Can go to the next one. Paragraph 69 applauds that cultural expression, storytelling, and interdisciplinary artistic practice can support climate adaptation by strengthening risk awareness, integration of knowledge transmission, and community-led responses to climate impacts. Here you have another contribution from Claire from the Netherlands, and she adds memory institutions, cultural expression, storytelling, and interdisciplinary artistic practices, as well as efforts by memory institutions to preserve and provide access to movable heritage and diverse cultural expression can support. And here you have another one that is from me, actually, that adds that cultural expression and artistic practices do not act only in climate awareness, but also as a psychological reconstruction, collective trauma processing, strengthening community bonds, preserving territory memory, and expanding collective capacity to imagine livable futures. And that's one that is very strong for me, because something that I saw here where I live when we have the floods and that took all over the state, and I really saw it happening here. We can go to the next one. Strongly considers that cultural infrastructure are capable to serve as community resilience and adaptation hubs during climate-related extreme events by providing temporary shelter, cooling, or healing support and social protection measures that strengthen local adaptation, disaster risk reduction, resilience capacities, and support community-led responses. And here I have a comment as well. Resilient culture, that is from me, that I did it for MoHub here. So resilient cultural infrastructure should include not only formal cultural facilities, but also community creative ecosystem, independent spaces, local laboratories, and hybrid cultural structures, preferably located outside risk areas and with adequate access to internet and digital communication, recognizing that these spaces frequently operate as local structures for care information, shelter, and community mobilizations during climate crises. It was as well from the floods here. And so let me see if you have some. Oh, thank you. And perfect. Yes. So in the paragraph 7.3, we emphasize that climate action strategies should include quantitative and qualitative measures to safeguard cultural rights and heritage, as well as cultural landscapes, recognizing their role in sustaining identity, social cohesion, and community resilience in the face of climate impacts. And here you have consideration for adding an element here from Syrian from France. Urge the application of data-driven policy advisory, mixed methods evaluation, and foresight frameworks to systematically integrate traditional ecological knowledge into regional adaptation planning. Recognize that safeguarding the traditional understanding of local ecosystem is essential to bolster adaptive capacity and ensure localized climate resilience. And here, just to show her. So here we have a new paragraph suggestion from Maria Eduarda Pacheco, who also is a colleague in MoHub. And she observes with concern that climate impacts intensify pre-existing social, territorial, and racial inequalities, disproportionately affecting Black peripheral communities, historically marginalized territories, and populations with precarious infrastructure, frequently among the first to experience floods, food insecurity, displacement, material losses, and ruptures of community bonds. Additionally, recognize that community cultural practices, local solidarity networks, collective memory, and territorial belonging play an essential role in building resilience, adaptation, and community-led responses, strengthening local capacities for care, reconstruction, and social organization in the face of extreme climate events. And let me see if you have any comments. Okay, perfect. And so we have another new paragraph suggestion that consider adding further gender lens into the section as per Vanessa from Uganda. Adaptation has been practiced by communities long before the word entered on lexicon. Our project Dandelion Dialogues with women, smallholder farmers across frontline communities, review what formal adaptation policy has long overlooked. Women are the primary architects of community resilience. They select and preserve climate resilient seeds, read environmental signal to predict rainfall, manage local granaries, and adapt planting cycles to shifting seasons. Knowledge systems build and refining across generation. And I think it's a very nice input, and I can say that we can see the same here in Brazil, and wherever we have like any kind of crisis here, the first one to put yourself in front of that are women as well. So we can follow to the next one. And we have a question here just before passing it to finance. So where Catherine is making a question about religious centers count as cultural centers, because they tend to be the first responders and predominantly Black, brown communities, including climate crisis. And I think we have to probably discuss that, but in my view, I believe yes, because at least it's what I seen here when we had like the big crisis about the floods, like they really were important place for that. So now, thank you for all the contributions and for the space here, and like we are going to move on to finance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, and thank you to everyone for your patience in getting through all these sections. Finance is the last section, and then we'll be going to closing. So fear not, we're nearly through. Okay, let's get started. So first, there are the key facts, which I'll just take us through. So the finance section opens the means of implementation and the support chapter. So that's the phase that we're in now. It makes the case that culture-based climate action remains severely underfunded, despite its relevance to mitigation, adaptation, capacity building, and loss and damage. So that's kind of the inclusion that we need to see. It calls for eligibility recognition, dedicated funding windows, grant-based and locally led finance, direct access for cultural and community actors, support for preparatory work, philanthropic alignment, ethical finance, and investment in cultural resilience. Let's go. So on the alignment examples, we can kick off with paragraph 75. So notes with concern that finance directed towards culture-based climate actions remains extremely limited, despite the role of the cultural ecosystem in precisely delivering those elements that I just named in the facts. So let's go to the inputs. And I know that there are actually 6 different inputs. So just to kind of take you through the first, we have some recognition here around, it must be opened up for cultural actors, heritage sites, those that are left out of the loop. We note that dedicated funding is, of course, limited, but the crucial existing climate finance mechanisms are precisely that, to have investment into cultural actors, heritage institutions, creative industries. And there is a significant gap, and that these cultural actors, including youth initiatives and community-based organizations, often lack even access to funding despite their critical role. Let's go through to the next 3 on this same article, Article 75. Did it change? It did. Okay, so then we have Yes, it did change. So access to climate finance again is echoed. Those finance mechanisms need to be more inclusive, more accessible. They need to recognize culture. There is a need to strengthen those dedicated funding mechanisms. So I think this is also one of those key inputs here, precisely using the tools that are already well established. And notes with concern the limited availability, moving beyond traditional green infrastructure to invest cultural actors, heritage institutions, youth networks, and so on. So kind of across these inputs, we're seeing proposals to include community change, inclusive mechanisms, youth access, formal recognition, regional resilience, and that kind of move beyond infrastructure. So let's go to Article 76. So notes that although existing climate finance architecture may in principle support where it contributes, it remains largely absent from funded portfolios due to limited eligibility recognition, lack of that dedicated funding window, and also the insufficient guidance on how we can access those climate finance mechanisms. So to go to the inputs, here, there's a kind of talk around that expanded eligibility criteria to explicitly include community organizations and those working at the intersection of culture and climate. Then there's also the acknowledgement that finance must move beyond technical and market-driven approaches to recognize cultural continuity. So that's the public interest storytelling and locally rooted knowledge systems. I'm just going to check the chat. Okay, I think we're good. So then in principle, they're affirming that the architecture exists. The barrier is access, eligibility gaps. All of these things are precisely what is needed for the clear guidance. Let's move on. So 77 recognizes that persistent global imbalances and structural issues in climate finance flows and emphasizes the need to significantly increase accessible grant-based and local-led finance. And this again pays attention to those that are global majority countries, particularly least developed, small island developing states, and that disproportionate climate vulnerability, and their significant potential to advance culture-based climate solutions. And again, here's the rooted in local knowledge, heritage, and community resilience. I am seeing a comment on paragraph 76 that we should emphasize the importance of pushing and influencing climate finance schemes to incorporate cultural aspects and endorse initiatives that provide frameworks for measuring cultural input, thereby building confidence in scale-up funding opportunities. Okay, thank you so much, Natalia, for adding that. Okay, so on 77, so then we have here the sort of names of the specific barriers, those complex application processes, the eligibility that's tied to formal institutions, and funding models that prioritize technological over social cultural innovation. And then we have this affirmation of equity dimension, equitable access. It's a major challenge. And so I think both here are kind of speaking on that structural access and the kind of disproportionate exclusion of grassroots and community level actors, specifically those focused in the global majority. So again, I think it's reinforcing that article's concern about the persistence imbalances in funding flows. So there's some alignment here that we need to integrate. Let's go on to 78. So here we have a direct call to action to named climate funds. So that includes the GCF, the GEF, the Adaptation Fund, the SCCF, and others. I'm just abbreviating here for the sake of time. And so there's a kind of formal establishment of the eligibility criteria, dedicated funding windows, and to recognize culture, cultural heritage as cross-cutting dimensions, spanning mitigation, adaptation, resilience. So let's go through to the inputs. So we have calls on accessible pathways, specifically naming food culture transformation. I saw that in the comments earlier about food systems. So that's one other place in finance where we have this food culture transformation. Climate literacy and experiential community programming as fundable categories. I'm not sure why my hand's up. Then we have emphasizes the multi-industry solutions and a call for cultural competency and equity to be built into those funding methodologies. And then a most direct critique here of narrative-driven and education-based interventions are not yet recognized as legitimate climate action, with funding still skewed towards large-scale infrastructure and technology at the expense of behavioral change and public trust. So here there's like what should be funded, how it should be assessed, and then why current framing excludes culture. All right, so going on to 79. So in brief, urges climate funds, multilateral development banks, bilateral donors, and the like to formally recognize cultural ecosystem actors, including rights holders and those working under Article 12, as eligible implementing partners. So that's really key. And then where appropriate, also direct recipients of climate finance and emphasis on directly impacted communities, again, contributing to the other sections of the global stocktake. So let's go to the inputs. And these are the inputs on alignment, just for a reminder. So then here there's a call for rapid response and dedicated funding for grassroots movements, environmental human rights defenders and artivists, with particular urgency around protecting frontline cultural actors from the financial and legal pressures of growing criminalization of climate advocacy, something super key for land defenders. And then we have reaffirms the structural imbalance. So finance continues to flow disproportionately to large-scale technical and infrastructure projects, sidelining cultural actors, those grassroots and traditional ecological government systems. So this sort of raising the stakes with the protection of rights, reinstates the core structural problem with the government's lens. And yeah, that's kind of a call beyond eligibility into accountability. Noting in the chat from Catherine, I'd be curious to see how to better fund culture-based work by playing with communications, funding for said larger scale projects. Yeah, and there's a lot of really great initiatives that also really play with kind of storytelling and narrative change. So on Article 81, there's encourages climate finance providers to broaden what funding covers beyond project outputs to include preparatory and enabling work that makes culture-based climate action possible. And that's kind of across coordination, research, translation, etc. And calls for the long-term, flexible, predictable, and where appropriate, multi-year and unrestricted funding. So let's go to the inputs. So there's a call for decentralized micro-grant mechanisms that resource local creative projects directly, preventing cultural practitioners from being sidelined. Calls for simplified access and small grant mechanisms, specifically for community-based cultural organizations. Then there's the emphasizes direct financing for the long-term sustainable programs while minimizing intermediaries and ensuring effective communities and cultural actors have meaningful participation in planning, implementation, and monitoring. So I think there's also a kind of thread here around the convergence on the structural fix. That's direct, simplified, flexible funding that reaches local level without being filtered through those institutional intermediaries. So I think there's quite a strong alignment across these that could go into 81. Moving to 84, I believe. Yeah, so recommends that loss and damage funds explicitly recognize cultural heritage, cultural identity, and community-based cultural responses in their programming and access modalities, grounded in the fact that UNFCCC technical work already identifies cultural heritage as a named category of non-economic loss. Let's go to the inputs. So we have current climate finance mechanisms are overly technocratic and often fail to account for non-economic values. And then here, really grounded in kind of local experiences, when a community is forced to move, they lose more than land. They lose their sense of home and history. And we must recognize these non-economic losses like the disappearance of sacred sites. And I think that climate heritage goes a long way in sort of acknowledging and recognizing this, but as we mentioned, it has to kind of move beyond just what is already recognized in the technical work of cultural heritage. All right, I'm seeing some consensus in the chat. Let's move on. So 86 recognizes the creative economy generates over $2 trillion annually and supports tens of millions of jobs and encourages governments, etc. Including cultural institutions and the private sector to explore innovative financing mechanisms, such as benefit sharing, profit reinvestment, cultural climate funds, community philanthropy, and creative industry climate partnerships. Let's move to the input. So here we have advocating for leveraging the commercial and reputational value of climate content to incentivize the private sector financing of cultural initiatives. So calling also for multilateral climate funds and international finance institutions to formally integrate cultural actors, creative agencies, and NGOs into core funding allocation criteria. I think just even the use of the word funding allocation criteria, that sentence is super important. I'm not seeing any comments, so we can keep going, which is great because we're nearly at gaps and suggested edits. So last one for alignment. So recommends that climate finance across mitigation, adaptation, capacity building, and loss and damage prioritize direct access for cultural rights holders, cultural actors, and affected communities, minimizing intermediaries, ensuring resources reach those most impacted while maintaining transparency and accountability. So I feel like even in just some of those inputs I was reading for the above paragraph, actually they have some alignment and synergy here too, but let's go to some of the other inputs. So here we have, direct financing should target long-term sustainable programs while minimizing unnecessary intermediaries and ensuring meaningful participation of effective communities in planning, implementation, and monitoring. So I think there's something here to understand, like, we are kind of all saying the same thing, but specifically which paragraphs are suited better to some of these inputs. And so we've made the suggestion, as I said, that those three that I was reading just, I believe for R84 are really suited here too. However, we have to kind of make sure that in those differences, 91 and 84 are actually saying two very different and important things. So just bearing that in mind for the way we align. Also seeing your comment here, Sarah, it is also essential to strengthen local institutions for that, so they can develop the governance, financial management, accountability, legal support, and operational structures necessary to directly manage large-scale funding. This can reduce dependency on intermediaries, ensure that resources remain within communities and territories most affected by climate impacts. Yeah. And I would love to see the ways in which we can sort of embody this statement precisely in one of these articles that we have, because I think everything you're listing here is super key to understand the real kind of operationalization of the finance that's needed. Okay, let's go to gaps and suggested edits. So on Article 76, there's it identifies why cultural initiatives are absent from funded portfolio. Oh, wait, I think I'm reading ahead. Okay, notes that although existing climate finance architecture may in principle support where it contributes, it remains largely absent from funded portfolios. So actually, this is one that we previously read. So let's go to what the suggested gap and edit is. So consider adding a point about the imbalance between technology-based solutions and culture-based solutions. So we have here existing mechanisms continue to prioritize infrastructure, energy, and technology, leaving cultural actors, creative industries, and heritage institutions largely excluded. and also that funding mechanisms overwhelmingly favor technological infrastructure-driven initiatives, multilateral funds, green bonds, international finance institutions, should formally integrate cultural actors into core allocation criteria. So again, I think this is an input that we heard before, but is also quite suited here. Yeah, so here then it's kind of this transition of a kind of structural skew, and that the article should reflect that cultural-based solutions are being actively deprioritized. Checking the chat. Great to see some consensus on these inputs here. All right, let's move on. So 80 requests that dedicated public funding windows, grant programs, and readiness to support be made available for culture-based climate action, and its inclusion of art, science, collaboration, climate and cultural literacy, so forth, and climate-focused cultural programming for cultural rights holders and stakeholders, including approaches that strengthen economic resilience, stability, agency for artists and cultural practitioners, etc. So let's go to the inputs. So here we have this increased funding need for youth-led and culture-based climate initiatives. We also have a comment around more accessible climate funding needed for youth-led. And then there's, again, this is actually a duplication. So I'm wondering if maybe that's a mistake. No, they are different. Okay, so in their familiarity, I thought they were the same, but I think what's clear here then is that they're all kind of calling for the same thing. It's a consistent message around youth-led efforts that are named in the gap, and that the current article needs to have that more explicitly included. Slightly pausing in case there are any questions, but otherwise we can go on to the next paragraph. So this is quite a chunky one. So this is calling on climate funds, philanthropic institutions to improve practical access for cultural and community-based actors through streamlining of applications, direct access modalities, participatory approaches, with specific recognition of Indigenous peoples, local communities, people of African descent, and so forth, notes that a very small share of global climate finance currently reaches Indigenous peoples and local communities directly, and calls for funding approaches that support cultural continuity and locally embedded practices beyond short-term results-based delivery. So I think even though it's quite long, there are some really key, powerful moments in here. Let's go to the comment. So climate finance must build permanent local structures with operational autonomy, fair remuneration, and real decision-making capacity. So that's not isolated projects led by external organizations that concentrate resources around their own methodologies, while treating local organizations as a voluntary territorial support. So I think even in this single input, it's kind of sharpening that article's direct access principle with power, autonomy as its main dimension. So it's not just about access, but who controls implementation. Also seeing some comments. So apologies for moving fast. So 82 should also highlight the need for multilateral stakeholders and methodologies that enable and support communities to access these opportunities, and for a proper governance structure to manage the resources, fostering a positive impact. These institutions should allow and support fair benefit sharing agreements between parties. I love the inclusion of that. The LA consultation emphasized the never covered costs, interesting, of project proposal, pre-production and research, generally fully covered by applicants without any financial support. Ideally, it could be covered by climate funds. This is a problem of survival to many creative cultural actors, even before submitting proposals and projects. I think this is something that we also directly experience as a youth-led organization that does this work at the intersection. So 100% echoing that comment as well. I will even just take a second to react. Okay, let's keep going. So now on 86. So recognizes the creative economy generates over 2 trillion. I do believe we had this one earlier, so I'm not going to spend too much time. And that then it's calling on the benefit sharing, profit reinvestment, cultural climate funds, community philanthropy, creative industry, climate partnerships, so on. Let's have a look at the so this is on the young people and residents of peripheral communities that are disproportionately concentrated in low budget creative work. Employability initiatives should support pathways toward dignified income generation, enabling genuine engagement with climate issues and the autonomy to act within this agenda. So I guess here the input is also that article's framing of the creative economy should account for internal inequities, that the economic scale at the top is not translating to those resources or agency at the community level. Okay, I'm seeing consensus in the chat, so let's keep going. I believe this is the last one. Yes. So encourages public and philanthropic funders to support UNFCCC sectorial engagements. That's under the Marrakesh Partnership. That's to mobilize non-party stakeholders, including initiatives advancing this work, while emphasizing the importance of maintaining independence, transparency, and integrity, and ensuring that financial contributions do not influence their objectives, governance, or outcomes. There's a lot around autonomy here as well. And we just have one small input to say, would you please add private sectors? And I kind of put it to the floor to say if that's an easy consensus to kind of come to. Okay, great. And then the next slide. Oh no, there is another one. There's 94. So encourages increased investment in disaster risk reduction, response, and recovery for cultural ecosystems, both to address the impacts of climate-related disasters on artists, cultural practitioners, cultural infrastructure, including heritage, and to support the role of cultural ecosystem in contributing to preparedness, resilience building, and recovery processes. This is a paragraph that is really about really aligning with country objectives as well and showing how culture is also that mechanism. So let's go to the inputs. Encourages financing for projects related to data collection, research, and knowledge production on the impacts of climate change on culture and heritage, culture and cultural heritage. I think this is really key also in terms of the kind of metrics and credibility and measures that would also be asked of those things. So again, looking to the chat for consensus on any of these notes from Amina, who was joining us in Marrakesh, and she lives here in the High Atlas region. To the next slide. Okay, and then I believe there is just one new paragraph suggestion, but I have lied to you before about when I thought it was the end. So requests that dedicated funding windows, grants, and rapid response support be made available for grassroots movements, movement infrastructures, environmental human defenders, and artivists. Urges the creation of funding streams that protect these frontline cultural actors from the crippling financial, legal, and legal burdens imposed by the increasing criminalization of climate advocacy. I'm seeing a lot of consensus in the chat here, a lot of pluses, so that's really great. And also a super important point around the criminalization of climate advocacy, which I don't believe we have huge amounts of input on already in the Culture Global Stocktake. So good to see that suggestion here. Okay, to the next slide. Okay, so we made it. Well done, everybody. We finished all the sections. The very first thing I want to say is that this is part one, because as you all know, we didn't go through every section of the Culture Global Stocktake just yet. So part two tomorrow, we have again a morning session and an evening session. So the evening one is at the same time as today, and the morning is 8 a.m. GMT +1, and apologies for not relaying that in UTC. It's just the way I have it in front of me. So please do sign up and participate again. Your active participation today was really, really appreciated. And I just want to thank you all for joining us and being an amazing participant and contributor to this first part of the plenary. So to close, we've now completed this stage of the review process and reached version 1 of the draft, and that was supported by a very significant body of input from across regions, across sectors, and across communities. And as kind of noted and like mentioned throughout this session, this is a volunteer-led effort, and we deeply appreciate the generosity, commitment, and the thoughtfulness that so many of you have brought to this process. It is completely decentralized in that sense, and we really encourage you to kind of take it forward and to be exactly supporting us in all the kind of inclusions and sort of dissemination of this as we continue. So the next step is going to be to take this draft forward for further review through the network, which there will be an additional period of drafting and refinement ahead of the final version, which we're going to present with the Secretariat, UNESCO and other partners. And you can see some of those key touch points here in the slide. The longer term objective remains to ensure that culture is recognized more fully and more clearly within the global climate policy landscape. We also encourage everyone to remain engaged through the website, through social media, and through the partnership form. As Sanya mentioned at the very beginning, we've already had it filled out. I think I saw the stat of 70 plus, at 73, I think it said, but 70 plus times. And so we really encourage even more. And we're really heavily reliant on our partners to support us in this work. This kind of plenary has also been put together with the tireless effort of our team, and we really can't do it alone. And so there are additional opportunities to support awareness raising, communications, and the movement building, including the upcoming trainings and organizing activities that we have. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to be sending cultural delegations to Bonn. And as I kind of say that Sam and I are going from ENC, but we are convening other cultural actors and those that can kind of attend and follow the ACE negotiations, the midterm review on that, and others that where we need to really be pushing for these inputs to be really aligned and included. And then, of course, the goal is COP31 Antalya, where we're going to be presenting this, as I said, and the real kind of effort here is to have these different revisions and drafts in order to kind of have that final version sort of, integrated. And then the next slide. Yep, so draft 2 is going to come out next week, inshallah. And you can, of course, follow everything at the Cultural Global Stocktaker website. This is a really beautiful picture of the in-person convening we did just in end of March, where we gathered 50 delegates here in Marrakesh, which they were very lucky to be here then because it's really hot now. To the next slide. And yeah, here we are as the partnership form. If you are also personally interested, and we really encourage you to fill this out and to work with us. I guess I'll just open the floor for kind of any comments or questions. We're ahead of time, and I would love to give you back some of your evening and just thank you again for staying with us the whole time. I don't know if any of our other amazing facilitators wanted to come in. Okay, I see a couple hands. Beto, would you want to come in first? And then I see Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leia, for the amazing work, amazing presentation, and conducting this meeting. Actually, I have an invitation. We launched during COP30 the Alliance for Youth-Led Futures. This is a collaboration that born with Catalyst Now, which is this branch from the World Economic Forum and Schwab Foundation to foster social entrepreneurship. And the objective for the Alliance for Youth-Led Futures is exactly to shape the agenda and the roadmap that we have for Antalya, where we launched a call in the beginning of this year, which the question, what peace means to you? So we want to bring this reflection, and I think that it truly connects with the purpose that we have here in order to have culture more visible in the public policies and in the discussion. So I included the link for the Alliance into the chat. So everyone is invited to join, and let's join forces. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much and for that call to action. What a beautiful prompt as well. Dan?
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to say congratulations and a huge thank you to the whole team for hosting the space and guiding us through it today. It was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to more tomorrow.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I don't think I see any other hands, in which case I believe we can wrap. And yeah, thank you all so much again. Thank you to the amazing facilitators that took us through the sections. I know it was a beast, but we did it. We did it. Well done.